Boss fights have been an integral part of video games for almost as long as video games have existed, as a test of how well you've learned the mechanics and systems of the game, and as a culmination of encounters that have brewed for large sections of the game, if not the entire game itself. These set-piece moments serve an important purpose in any experience. However, as the years have gone by, boss encounters have also changed considerably, and traditional boss fights, which were once the norm, have grown less and less common. Many times, most of the times in fact, such interactive cutscenes can be quite disappointing and can't stand as proper substitutes for actual fights. But there are times when these cinematic encounters prove to be just the right fight for the game in question and are executed very, very well. In this feature, we'll take a look at 15 such excellent interactive boss encounters in games. There are spoilers ahead for all games mentioned in this feature. If you see us beginning to talk about a game that you do not want spoiled, skip ahead to the next entry. Wraith, Uncharted 4. Uncharted has tried its hand at traditional boss fights, but it's fair to say that it hasn't always worked out. As the series grew though, it embraced its strengths as an interactive cinematic adventure, and started working that into what would have otherwise have been traditional boss fights. The final encounter between Nate and Wraith at the end of Uncharted 4 was a culmination of that. The dramatic fight between them, after tensions boiled throughout the entire game, was tense and exciting, and the burning ship loaded with Henry Avery's treasure serving as the perfect backdrop. It proved to be a fitting conclusion to the journey. Liquid Ocelot, Metal Gear Solid 4. As the conclusion to the long-winding Metal Gear saga and the culmination of the conflict that had been brewing between the Twin Snakes over the course of multiple games, there was a lot riding on Guns of the Patriots. But the way that it wrapped up said conflict was beyond anyone's expectations. The final hand-to-hand fight between the dying and aging Solid Snake and the liquid-possessed Revolver Ocelot was a harrowing and utterly thrilling sequence, and as much of a joy to play through as it was to even watch. Hermes, God of War 3. God of War as a series has always prided itself on having some excellent boss fights, proper traditional boss fights, and God of War 3 was absolutely brimming with them, at times almost to the point of being a boss rush type experience. One of the many Olympians Kratos crosses paths with and kills in the conclusion of his Greek story is Hermes, and the encounter against him was absolutely brilliant, being structured as a high-speed chase that ended with Kratos brutally dismembering him almost literally from head to toe. Micah, Red Dead Redemption 2. Traditional boss fights wouldn't work in a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, so there were many who didn't really expect to see one in it. And while Arthur's final fight against Micah on top of the mountain, or by the caves as the case may have been, was by no means a conventional boss encounter, it proved to almost be the perfect conclusion to his story. It was a proper culmination of everything the game had been building towards, and was a scene ripe with palpable tension, as a sick and dying Arthur engaged in desperate fisticuffs against the traitorous Micah, while Pinkertons and the remnants of the Van der Linde gang engaged in a furious firefight in the background. Agent Ross, Red Dead Redemption. While there was no climactic 1v1 fistfight at the end of Red Dead Redemption like there was in its sequel, its epilogue still closed things off on an excellent note. The death of John Marston at the hands of the despicable Agent Ross was something that left a huge hole in the hearts of everyone who played the 2010 title, and getting to play as Jack in the epilogue to track down the agent many years later was a sad yet fitting conclusion to the story. Jack and Ross's standoff at the edge of the river wasn't a long sequence by any means, but it felt well earned and concluded the story in a satisfying manner. Jackknife, Mirror's Edge. Like much of Mirror's Edge itself, its final sequence is a bit unconventional. It's a short sequence as Faith makes the revelation that Jackknife has been working against the runners all along, but watching her jump off the rooftop and kick him off of the chopper, only to narrowly escape and also save her sister from the helicopter while it crashes, is a great scene. Harbinger, Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3 is often criticized for not being the satisfactory conclusion to the trilogy that many had hoped it would be, and its lack of a final encounter against the Harbinger, who'd been built up as the big bad for 2 games, left many people disappointed. However, one area where it absolutely does not disappoint was how it wrapped up the Elusive Man and his story. Shepard's final confrontation against the leader of Cerberus inside the Citadel was, in truth, not really an encounter at all. It was an exchange of dialogue. But it was perfectly framed and structured, and the entire sequence where Shepard tried to make the Elusive Man stand down, the success of which depended on how far along the Paragon or Renegade scale you were, while both him and Captain Anderson stood helplessly in the crosshairs, was a thrilling and tense one. Voss, Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3's underutilization of Voss and his premature death are things that have been criticized by even the staunchest fans. He was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best character in the entire game, and we would have loved to have seen him play the role of the antagonist for the entire duration. At least he got a great send-off though. Jason's trippy trek through hallucinatory environments as he and Voss engage in their final standoff encapsulated everything that made the villain so great. And though we were sad to see him dispatched at the end so prematurely, it was certainly a section of the game that was very well executed. Mr. Negative, Spider-Man. Insomniac's Spider-Man, for all of its strengths, is a bit hit and miss when it comes to its boss fights, with at least one or two of its major set-piece boss battles having been somewhat disappointing. But then again, there were a few encounters that exceeded all expectations. Spider-Man squares off against Mr. Negative a few times throughout the game, but the fight that we're talking about is their face-off inside of a train rushing through the Manhattan subway. The fight itself was extremely cinematic and exciting, while the way the entire sequence ended, with Spidey trying to bring the barreling train to a stop, was not only great fan service, but was just a great scene in general. Mick Cutler, Resistance 3. The sequence where Capelli faces off against Mick Cutler is a very short one, but it's one that sticks out in memory. Like many other entries on this list, the encounter is mostly dominated by QTEs, but watching Capelli put a bullet into Cutler's head and then being able to make that bullet explode while it's still inside of him, only to watch it blow in an explosion of brains and gore, is an excellent moment, and that's what you get for killing Malikov. Scarecrow, Batman Arkham Asylum. Batman's encounters with the terrifying Scarecrow in Batman Arkham Asylum are some of the best sequences in the entire game. And for a game that is full of memorable moments as this one is, that is very high praise indeed. These sequences, which almost serve as 2.5D side-scrolling sections, incorporate stealth and light platforming, are an excellent adaptation of the character of Scarecrow and the effect that he can have on his enemies. They're also the perfect example of how to do a non-traditional boss encounter properly. Tormentor, Dead Space 2. Unfortunate engineer Isaac Clarke's encounter against the Tormentor in Dead Space 2 comes out of nowhere, and its surprising nature makes it one of the best moments of the entire game. The entire sequence that follows as the environment crashes around Isaac and he tries to escape from the Tormentor in the middle of all this chaos is thrilling and pure edge-of-the-seat stuff, while watching the sequence unfurl in the vacuum of space for a few brief seconds also makes it one of the best set-piece moments we've seen in a game in years. Judge Holloway, Silent Hill Homecoming. If we're being completely reductive about it, we could easily dismiss this scene where Judge Holloway meets her demise in Silent Hill Homecoming as press square repeatedly, and well, on paper, that's pretty much all we have to do. But when is it ever not satisfying to see a baddie meet their end by way of a drilling machine going right through their jaw and into their head while it's still running? It's a gory, brutal scene, and we can't help but love it. End boss fight. Wet. Wet, the 2009 third-person shooter that came out on the PS3 and the Xbox 360 was by no means a perfect game. It was surely ridden with several issues, but there was also a lot to like here, from its edge, charm, and stylish gameplay. Its final sequence where Ruby squares off first against Tarantula and then again against the drug lord Rupert Pelham encapsulated that quite well. QTEs are often looked down upon by the vast number of people, and rightly so in many cases, but the entire climactic sequence of Wet was done in the form of QTEs, and surprisingly enough, it ended up working very well for the kind of experience it was. End boss fight, The Order 1886. The Order 1886 might have turned out to be a disappointment in the grand scheme of things, but it's a game that holds a very special place in the hearts of many. Its strengths as a cinematic experience was one of the things that made it endearing, and keeping those strengths in mind, the way it ended was almost perfect. Galahad's final fight against the monstrous form of Alistair is excellent and a memorable encounter that utilizes the game's cinematic strengths perfectly, and another example of how to implement QuickTime events in a boss fight properly. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.